Thanks to our show sponsors, The Sharp Edge, Real Agriculture's Machinery Update, and ADAMA Canada. While other sources of innovation run dry and fail to understand your needs, ADAMA is here to deliver. And we're all in on you. Talk to your ADAMA sales rep today. Good evening, everybody. Welcome here. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and it is wonderful to be back in the host seat. It feels like it's been a very long time, what with the holiday and with Kara hosting last week, and now back here. So thanks to everyone who's joining us live here. It always makes it so much fun. Hello, Warren. Hello, Ray. Would love to know where you're from and how the crops are looking. Ray, I would love to send you all the rain that we have had. It is wet. We were trying to make hay, and it just keeps raining. And that's probably going to come up at some point tonight and tomorrow or next week when we talk about maybe some disease, some insect pressure, those sorts of things. So a reminder, of course, for tonight's show, if you collect those CEU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists tomorrow. The replay of this will be up. You can let us know you watched and get those EU credits. So make sure you do that. Also, check out my new backdrop. Woo! There's going to be some adjusting happening because it's already almost fallen on me once. But yeah, look at that. It's pretty cool. All right, so let's bring in tonight's guest. Tonight's topic, of course, is our non-traditional weed control. And we're going to be talking everything from perhaps zappers to fire to robots. And of course, why would we even need all this stuff? So let's bring in our guests. Joining me tonight, we've got Kim Brown-Livingston and Chuck Baresich. I hope I got that right. Chuck, how are you doing?
Very good.
Good. All right. And Kim, we've had a bit of a technical glitch. So Kim, we've got a lovely photo of you, but I hope your voice carries loud and clear. How are you doing, Kim?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me, Lyndsey.
All right. Okay. So let's start with sort of where we're at right now. And Kim, I'll lean on you a little bit to sort of set the scene for us, but Chuck, definitely want you to weigh in on this one. But Kim, I'll start with you. So based in Manitoba, where are we at with tough to kill, perhaps multi-herbicide resistant weeds? Are we winning this war?
No, no, not at all. We're doing better than a lot of other places in the world, but we have been struggling with resistant weeds for a very long time. I was in university back in the 90s when the first resistant wild oats were found, and it was, how could this be? And I remember being at University of Manitoba in the hallways and listening to the buzz that was going on when this was actually discovered. And, I think at the time we thought, well, we'll fix this, it will go away. And that has not happened. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. And we are definitely dealing with now not just herbicide resistant weeds, but MHR weeds. So multiple herbicide resistant weeds. So now you're seeing the MHR there more so than just HR weeds. And we're dealing with so many different weeds now. So I think we are lucky we don't have it quite as bad as other places do, but we still have enough on our plates and we're watching because we know we've got some new introductions that are just going to make our lives that much more difficult.
Mm-hmm. And we will definitely be touching on some of those tonight. Chuck, you shared just before we went live here that you're from that lucky corner of the world that gets all the new nasty things. So whereabouts are you based? And tell me more about all the new terrible things you end up with.
Well, so we're down in southwestern Ontario. We're kind of, if people are unfamiliar with the area, we're sort of halfway between London and Chatham. And our soil type is sandy, like a sandy loam soil. And so everything just grows really, really well. Plus we get lots of rain and lots of moisture. And I think, in this area, obviously things started with the triazine resistant weeds. And I'm going to use some terminology here, Kim, that if I misquote it, you can reach through the radio and smack me. But I'm not a weed scientist, but we're farmers and we own a grain elevator and crop input supply company. So we started with your group 2 resistant, when Roundup Ready soybeans were invented, this area went 110% Roundup Ready, and everything And so then we had Roundup Ready giant ragweed, and we are one of the first areas to get Canada fleabane. People were saying, what is this weird weed that won't die? And then when dicamba soybeans came out, this area was 100% dicamba tolerant soybeans. And then it was dicamba. We are one of the first areas of Ontario to have water hemp. Our weed specialist, she carries a little coffee mug on it that has a picture of a Palmer amaranth, I think, on it, which I really don't want that. But we're very cognizant of this. And one of the reasons why we get it is, I think, cropping choices, but also we have equipment coming up from the United States, and that is improperly cleaned. And so there's all kinds of surprises coming out of the back of those machines.
So I love that we can blame someone else. Although, I mean, I say it in jest, but Kim, often these weeds do travel in some form or fashion. So we know that, yes, equipment is one of the ways these weeds can be introduced to an area. What are some of the other ways that we are concerned about new species or new species already herbicide resistant showing up in, say, Manitoba, where you are?
Right. And that's a really good point. We know we've done some of this to ourselves. We definitely have homegrown resistance. We did that.
Right.
We're all nodding. I mean, you can just see my picture, but I'm nodding. Everything Chuck was saying, I'm nodding. And yeah. Oh, and the cup from Kristen, that's from me because I have a matching one in Manitoba. It says water hemp coming it's water hemp coming to a field near you.
Oh, it is water hemp.
Yes,
coming to a field near you. Great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, on a Yeti mug.
We've already got it. Lovely. We've already got it.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's really tough. So, but something like water hemp is something that is not native to Manitoba. We don't have it. And actually in Manitoba, it's a tier 1 noxious weed. So under our Provincial Noxious Weeds Act, it has to be eradicated. So these weeds, when we find them, have to go. So these are our weeds that, would cause the most destruction and, devastation to our farmlands and our wildlands and our, that type of thing. So like our parks and even all that type of stuff. But something like a water hemp, we don't have it here at all. So when it does come in, we know it's coming in equipment. We know it could be coming in even in trucks that are bringing grain back and forth across the border. Right. We know those pigweed seeds are so tiny, they hide anywhere. We also know it's coming up in waterfowl, in the digestive tract of birds. They're basically eating it down south and dropping it off up north. So we know it's coming here. We know it's coming in floodwaters. It's a very small seed. It'll float, and we are finding it where the drains are backing up onto the corners of the fields or wherever there's drainage ditches and that water is backing up and anything coming from the south, because we know how polluted basically most of the United States is now with water hemp and Palmer. So we do know we're getting these weeds in a lot of ways that we just can't stop. So then when they do get here, we have to try to do what we can to not let them, get a foot in the door, or they get a foot in the door, we have to kick them out. So that's what we're trying to do when we find these weeds. But it's a really tough battle. They can come in so many different ways.
Yeah. And ways that, exactly as you mentioned, so whether it's waterfowl or water, these are, we can't stop this, right? So we have to deal with what we're given. Something like equipment, okay, we have some control over potentially bringing in, cleaned equipment, or once we get it, where do we clean it? What do we do with it? But some of these things are completely out of our control. So we do have to recognize what these weeds are. So I do want to send a shout out very quickly, Kim. There's a brand new soybean school on realagriculture.com talking about the pigweed party and about the importance of identifying those weeds that stick up above the crop canopy, especially as the crops start to mature, and make sure you get out there and scout, make sure. And I love Kim in that video. Kim mentions having a bag, keep a garbage bag on hand. Anything that's suspicious or you don't know what it is, pick it, put it in that bag. I just envision all these people, stopping the combine to go pick weeds. And I really hope people actually do it. I really do. Actually, Jason Vogt has joined the chat. He's from Southern Manitoba as well. Jason's team, I think, was one of the ones that found a Palmer amaranth plant in Manitoba, or it was on a client's field. And so I do want to know, Jason, will you be running around with garbage bags? Now, so Chuck, to this point, so I mean, in your area, you have been battling either very naughty weeds or herbicide resistant, or I love this new term, Kim, MHR, multiple herbicide resistant weeds. How has that sort of informed your interest and your move towards introducing things like robotics, which we're going to talk about tonight, into the weed control picture?
Well, I think that there's two reasons why we're interested in this, and um, the first is going to be overall effectiveness of herbicides. Um, I don't see chemical companies lining up to make new chemistry to an industry that, or to a consumer base that doesn't really like them. So there just isn't a lot of new chemistry coming,
Mm,
and and farmers, as a farmer, like, nothing is really easier than spraying. So, like, we really like spraying. Like, it's easy, it's simple. You can do
mhm,
lots of acres. We've had good success in the past, but that really isn't that viable. And what's happening in Ontario is we're seeing more and more vegetables being grown,
mm,
other crops than corn and soybeans. And so the herbicides that might be able to kill some of these noxious weeds, you can't use in carrots and onions and those kinds of crops. So, kind of looking forward into the future, if we're going to have resistant weeds, which we know we're going to have, because we've always had them, or not always had them, there's always been there to some degree. We know we're going to have them, and we know that we likely won't have good chemical options to control them. As a farmer and a business owner, we're sitting here saying, well, what are my options? What can I do? Do I use electricity? Do I use flame burners, cultivation? What options are there? And that's where we started looking at some robotic technology, um, to as an alternative to simply using herbicides.
Producer Jay, can you bring there's I think it's the presentation, the carbon presentation, page 2. We talked about this just briefly,
Yep,
sort of outlining where we're at as far as no, it's the one that has it's the carbon present,
that
that
one
one.
right
There we
there.
go. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so because you mentioned another thing, and that's time and
Hmm.
labor, right? So
Yep,
spraying, we can cover a lot of acres relatively quickly and with good efficacy, which is the other
that's
part of
correct.
this.
Yep.
So that, of course, is that is sort of everything else we sort of manage or measure all these up against, right? Is
Hmm.
if I can't spray, or
Then
if
what?
spraying isn't working anymore, then what?
Yep.
And so, yeah, so I think this is a great table of, you know, what we can do. So I guess from here, though, the question is, and you're working with robotics, and you're right, we and some of the other technologies that we're going to look at tonight. um what has been so far, as you mentioned, working into crops, working into some vegetable production, what so far has been the easiest sort of switch over, or has there been one?
Well, I think in terms of cost and effectiveness, nothing is cheaper than a cultivator. At the
Mm,
end of the day, that's probably one of the oldest methods, like since biblical times. You go through and you pull weeds out. And so the cultivation is probably the easiest one for people to understand, because it's being done in horticulture, it's being done in IP soybeans, it's being done in horticulture or in organic crops, uh, and what it requires is consistent movement, consistent depth, tool settings. It's something that's very easy to automate.
hmm
And I want to separate out, you know you know the robotic aspect is the task itself. From there on in, we start to add complication. There are limitations to what you can do with a cultivator, like how close you can get to the crop.
right.
And this is where you start saying, well, how do I mimic hand labor? Like, obviously, hand labor is the ideal. Bend over and pull the weed out. You're going to get every weed, but it's going to be expensive. And we have
hmm
growers that are spending $1,000 per acre per pass of hand weeding in certain crops. And so, depending on the value, this is where we look at robotics to say, how can we mimic hand labor with a machine, but at a lower cost, both physically and also financially. Because let's face it, we don't have a long line of people standing up, putting their hand up, saying, "I want to do that."
Absolutely. Now, so Kim, when you look at this list, to Chuck's point, I mean, hand labor within the horticulture world is perhaps an option, or maybe if you have children that have been naughty. But realistically, have you seen an increased interest in using tillage or forms of cultivation to get ahead of some of these weeds, or are farmers, in your experience or in your area, working more with tank mixes and those sorts of things?
Well, we have probably a much smaller hort industry in Manitoba. We have, we're more, 11 million acres of, our traditional grain crops type thing. So we're more, I'm looking at it more from that perspective. And really right now we're going with the more complex tank mixes, and we're going with, obviously rotating our herbicide groups, but within the year that whatever crop that is, we're doing with more complex tank mixes and things like that. We're using more pre. So I would say, right now we are increasing the amount of herbicides we're using and the complexity of them. So we're looking at that. But we do know realistically too that those are going to fail. Eventually they will fail. They're not going to last forever. We know there's nothing new coming. There might be some bright light on the horizon at some point, but there's not going to be lots of them probably. And there's nothing coming right now. And so we have to manage right now. We talk to people about using strategic tillage. There's a lot of interest in selling carbon credits, which usually means a reduction in tillage. You need to leave tillage on the table. You can't give that up. And even in our row crop industry in Manitoba, we have, a fair number of grain corn acres, and a fair number of our soybean acres are grown in wide rows. Our dry beans are mostly grown in wide rows, and our sunflowers. So, we've got some crops that are pretty much, a lot of them are grown in wide rows. And so, but really we have the inter-row cultivation has just about disappeared in those crops. And there's no reason why it can't come back other than, we are of course concerned about soil conservation and that type of thing. But that's a tool that we need to keep on the table. And so we've really gotten away from that. We also had a couple of maybe 3 dry years. Last year, not so much. We had a wet spring and then it got a bit dry. This year we're dry again. So, tillage is not that attractive when we're short on moisture. So, there's definitely limitations, but that is one thing that we do, like I said, we need to keep that on the table. But other than that, it's mostly we've just looked at increasing the complexity of our herbicide mixtures and putting more herbicides on that field and in that tank. But that isn't a long-term sustainable solution. It's not going to last forever.
Well, and Kim, I think I want to add for all the listeners, just remember the term a system. You know what I mean? It's a weed control system, right? And there's different elements of it, whether it's chemical, tillage, whatever, crop rotation, right? And I don't want people to lose sight of this. There isn't just one solution.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And a change in one thing may mean you have to change something else to make up for perhaps where something fell short. So, and we'll dig into that in a bit. So I do have a few really fun clips for tonight's show that I definitely want to bring in, especially because I'm sure there's lots of people who, if you have not seen this already, the weed zapper is quite cool. So we've talked about a few different ways that we can kill weeds. So I do want to play this clip that we do have of the weed zapper. I believe, oh goodness, now I forget which series this is from, so I don't want to say the wrong one. But producer Jay, if you could run the clip, and then we'll hear from a thank you to our sponsors right after.
You are out doing this weed zapping over the top. Talk to us a little bit about how that machine actually can kill the weed that's sticking up above the canopy.
So it's essentially the machine itself is a high voltage bar that's up in front of the tractor. It's powered by a 155 kilowatt generator. There's a transformer mounted in the back of the cabinet behind the tractor, and it steps it up to about 13,000 volts, which 13,000 volts is the voltage at the front of the tractor, the front bar.
Right.
And so when you're driving over the field, essentially anything that's sticking above the canopy that bar can touch, it will electrocute it. What happens is it turns the stem of the weed into a conductor, and it shoots electricity through that stem, and I think it essentially it boils the vascular system of that plant, so there's no nutrients that can move up or down. And so, you know, over the course of a few days, it starts to dry down, and it dies right down to the root.
Yeah, so when I was originally looking or thinking about the weed zapper, I thought sort of like a toaster going over top and doing physical damage to the weed, but I had a hard time getting my head around that it actually sends current right down the stem. So you don't just do physical damage to the top, you actually, the voltage takes the plant right out.
Correct, yeah. So it's not like a toaster element that's going to heat it up and burn it, although you can burn some plants.
Yeah.
And there is some physical damage to the surface of the plant, but you're essentially on a cellular level, you're taking out the plant, you know, at its vascular system by boiling those cells with electricity.
So lots of soybean growers, not just organic growers, have problems with these late emerging weeds. Rainfall's been abundant this year. You start getting weeds coming up over the top of the canopy. You don't really have many other options if you can't go down the road of something like this weed zapper. What are your favorite targets in terms of weeds that are traditionally a problem that the weed zapper can take out?
Well, essentially anything that it touches, it will kill. I would say different weeds show more quickly. So something like a sow thistle, which has got a lush stem with a lot of juice in it, that's a fantastic conductor. And so you see that effect really, really quickly. A lot of current goes through that weed. Same thing with lamb's quarter, ragweed, all those weeds. The younger they are, the better it seems to work. So once you've got a really, really tall, like a 6-foot pigweed, for instance, it has a harder time with that. You might need to take a few swipes at it. You might need to make 2 or 3 trips in order to kill a big weed like that. Right. I find that velvet leaf, it's got a woody, thick stem, and that the velvet leaf sometimes takes a few swipes with the zapper, so maybe 2 passes to kill a decent sized velvet leaf, just because of the physical structure of that stem.
Thank you to our sponsors tonight, ADAMA Canada, Real Eggs Machinery Update, and The Sharp Edge. The Sharp Edge is a video series where we look to farmers, agronomists, and researchers to give us the sharp edge on everything from agronomic problem solving to increasing profitability and improving sustainability. The Sharp Edge is made possible by support from Maize X Seeds. It was the Sharp Edge. Why couldn't I think of that? All right. So that is Phil in that video. Super cool. An organic grower here in Ontario, using the weed zapper. It is super cool. But I wanted to, and one of the reasons I chose that part of that video was that he talks about what it works well on and what it doesn't. Because one of my frustrations, I think, at times with some of these technologies, is that the weeds we maybe have the worst problem with, they don't always work so well on. And so it's sort of like a double whammy. It's like it works well on weeds that maybe aren't as big a problem. But Chuck, I'll start with you. Have you had one-on-one experience with this zapper? Because I'm terrified of the thing.
So I have seen it. I've seen it in operation. One of them is not too far away from us, about 45 minutes away. I think one of the strengths of the weed zapper is that it's simple. You know, it's a very simple thing to use. One of the downsides of the weed zapper is the weeds have to be so big that a lot of times crop damage has already occurred. And so there's pluses and minuses to using it. And again, it's not getting the weeds that are in the field. You know, everything has its place. I spent some time with a spot weed zapper from the UK called Rootwave that actually uses like a pinpoint type thing to target individual weeds, and it has its place, you know, and I think this is where that's kind of my opinion of it. What is interesting is that how it does kill the weeds by electrocuting them. There is something satisfying about watching weed get electrified. So there is something satisfying about that.
It absolutely. Kim, do you feel the same way, or does it sort of hurt your scientist heart just a little?
Well, I mean, it's another technique that we've got that we're using kind of after the fact. Those weeds have been there all season. They have competed with our plants, with our crop plants for moisture and light and fertilizer, and so the damage is done yield wise. I guess what we're trying to do at that point is stop them from setting seed. That's really important on some of these weeds, like especially something like our pigweed species, like our water hemp and our Palmer amaranth. They're very prolific seed producers. So there's that. It might be the only way of getting some of those weeds out once they become multiple herbicide resistant. Maybe you've tried everything and there's nothing left. So we're trying to, slow down those weeds. And unfortunately, some of the other methods that, we're going to talk about, they are kind of an after the fact weed control, because the damage was done long ago, and it really would be ideal if those weeds weren't there in the first place. So that's what we really need to be trying to do through a bunch of other ways, is to not have those weeds there, because we're coming at them. By the time they're taller than the crop, they're big. Those are big weeds, and and that's when we come out. That's when we're hand weeding the water hemp out of our fields, because that's when we can see it. That weed's been there for a long time already.
Some of the other technologies are more preventative weeders. So some of the robotic cultivators that we have, they are designed to remove the weeds before they get more than an inch tall. That's, kind of the ideal scenario.
So there's like being able to take them out at that point. So to cultivate them out, let's say, or we've got other technology like green on green technology, spray technology. So still using herbicides, but a lot less and very targeted. So maybe we can choose different products or the most effective, but get it directly on those weeds. So I mean, we have some options, but those are exactly that much earlier in the season. Whereas something like this, like the zapper, certainly, Kim, great point about weed seed return, which we also have a clip a little bit later about seed destructors. But the yield damage is done. This is more about longer term controlling the seed bank, or potentially a quality issue for sure, if we're talking maybe about IP beans or something like that. So now, Chuck, then let's back up a little bit, though. Some of the technologies that you have had some experience with that are earlier in the season. So we have talked about a bit about cultivation, but if you can share some of those, I think that'd be great.
Well, I think if you go up to the carbon presentation that I have on slide 7, can you put that up there?
Producer Jay shall do his best.
That's it right there. So
Dun, da, da, da.
So Carbon Robotics has brought someone who's about half an hour away from us has bought one of these. This is a $2 million machine, Canadian. You put it on a about a 200 horsepower tractor, and what it does is it uses AI and it targets the weeds and it zaps them with a laser. Also very satisfying to watch them burn. So one of the advantages of this machine is that it doesn't disturb the soil. So you're not getting the cultivation effect. It's very, very precise. You can get very, very close to any plant. One of the downsides of this machine is that it's very, very slow. And one of the things that we found in Ontario is that our weed pressure, because of our rainfall levels, is very, very high. And so the speeds that they've been able to maintain with this machine is a lot less than what they had hoped for. It's still working, like it's removing the weeds, but it's not getting anywhere near 2 miles an hour, like what it could get. So that's one of the techs that we've been looking at. The other one we've looked at is the spot spraying technology, like ExactApply, Green Eye, and the others. Again, one of the challenges that we have with that technology here is that a lot of the chemicals that we would like to use in the spot spraying, the weeds are resistant to. The weeds that we want to kill are the ones that those sprays don't kill anymore. And so it sounds super attractive, but it's not as attractive as you might think. And I think those technologies are better suited to a little bit drier climate. And I would think that growers, kind of Manitoba East, depending on the year for dryness, I guess, might have some great success with the green on green or with the green on brown spraying technology.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, so it's up to 2 miles per hour, but that doesn't mean that it's at 2 miles per hour. So this to me though, so this is not autonomous though. This is you're actually pulling it through the field,
Yeah,
or
so I
is
think the
yeah.
so the farm that has it has 4 drivers running. They're running 8-hour shifts.
Wow.
They're running 24 hours a day, and to try to get the acres through it. You
Yeah.
can find machines like this mounted on robotic, on autonomous machines. But I mean, when you're
Right.
going 0.3 miles an hour or 0.4 miles an hour, it's not hard to keep it on the row.
Right.
And then,
I should hope.
yeah, and then in
Yeah.
my other presentation, on the Haggerty presentation, on slide, let's go to slide 19.
Number 19.
We have a company from Quebec. So the Carbon Robotics laser weeder, it's made in Detroit. The company is from Seattle, Washington. This robot is made in Montreal. And if we go to the very next page, what it has, so this is an autonomous robot, and what it has is it has 3 mechanical fingers. So again, it uses an AI system. It's a little bit different. The Carbon Robotics laser weeder identifies the weed, and you actually tell it which weeds you want it to remove. Okay, and it
Okay.
will remove what you want. This robot, you tell it what crop you have. It identifies the crop, and
Um,
anything that's not the crop, it will try to pull out. So
and
it
this
uses
physically pulls it out.
it
This is like
physically pulls them out,
okay.
and
Hmm.
believe it or not, it's very, very challenging to get this done. And the robot has its challenges. We did not have great luck with it in 2022. We're having better success in 2023 in a leafy green crop.
Okay.
Um, Again, in horticulture, this kind of technology at these kind of speeds, when you're talking, 20-acre fields, 15-acre fields, 40-acre fields, you can get your head around this kind of technology. But
Okay.
let's say we want to move to a 50-acre soybean field or a 100-acre field, which I know in Ontario those are big fields, and maybe in the West those aren't very big. But this is where we move into cultivation, and again to try to increase that speed. How do we
Hmm.
get across the field faster? And what we're looking at as a company is maybe a combination of the both. Maybe you
Right.
use cultivation between the rows, and then you use something like this that's focused very, very close to the row. And we do have a couple of organic soybean producers that are trying out our cultivator robots for that very reason.
Jay, can you go back one? Um, because I saw this and I thought it was like a Airstream trailer,
Hmm.
to be
Yep.
honest. That's what it looks like to me.
Yep.
But I like the close up and that it actually like picks the weed or whatever is not the weed or not the crop.
That's correct.
So even just volunteers, whatever. Fascinating. Okay, so what I like about this though, and Chuck, I mean, obviously for some of these slower or more expensive things, I mean, we are talking about a horticulture crop, so there is higher value, potentially smaller land base. But I think where a lot of us get excited is that sometimes we see technologies like this proven in these higher value, and then as the technology gets more proven, it comes
Right.
down in price, it becomes more available, and so then just poor wheat farmers or poor corn farmers can also afford it. I say that tongue in cheek entirely, but it
That's
is
me.
neat to
That's
see.
me.
So and
Yeah.
it looks like in the comments anyway, there's lots of people who are excited to see the Zapper on
Hmm.
location near St. Thomas. It looks like at the summer tour.
Yep.
Margaret, if you want to plunk in more details about that, if anybody's interested, for sure. Now, Kim, I'll go back to you in these as well. I mean, we're looking at something that obviously is super expensive when we're talking about some of these things, but I still do, I get excited about can we get a technology brought in line cost wise, cost benefit wise, that it makes sense. And so one of the ones that certainly we are seeing on the prairies is either green on brown spot spraying or green on green spraying. um, Are you seeing much of that make it to the field in Manitoba?
Yeah, those are technologies that are just starting to get here. We do have a couple of those on the ground in Manitoba. I haven't seen them myself yet. Ideally, the idea would be too that if you are able to save, they're quite expensive machines, obviously, but if you are able to save a lot of pesticide, then ideally too, if you are being able to target certain weeds, you would spend more money on those particular weeds. I know some of the machines will have, a couple of different tanks, and one can be filled with one product to do kind of a broadcast spray, and then another tank for specialized, right? So we would hope that in that tank that you're doing specialized spraying, you're spending more money. You're using a lot less of the spray, but that's where we want to see these more complex tank mixes to make sure that we're not contributing to resistance, because as Chuck said, we do have, unfortunately, a lot of the weeds we're going after are already herbicide resistant. I mean, not so much in Manitoba compared to other places, but we definitely have our fair share. When we're looking at our wild oats, our kochia, that type of thing, those are our two bad ones. And then, of course, we're not sure when the water hemp does land on our doorstep. It does seem to be coming preloaded with at least a couple of kinds of resistance, sometimes 3. So, that where, again, we will start to run out of groups, but I do see that is really, that is a really good idea. And farmers are much happier at embracing that type of technology where they can save a lot. They're saving so much on the spray. It's just to make sure you're spending it too on the right sprays in the right spots.
Yeah. Well, and I think when we're, and I think, like my brother and I are corn and soybean farmers, and we're very removed from the customer. So like when someone is filling up, most of our corn goes for ethanol and then for pig feed. And so when someone's filling up their vehicle with gas, they're not thinking about the chemicals that I used on my cornfield. The issue becomes when we are growing carrots and we're growing stuff that's very, very close to the consumer. The idea of using a herbicide, even on a spot spraying perspective, just isn't that palatable. And I just don't know what the right answer is going to be. Do we invest our time in, I guess it's going to depend on the crop, obviously, but where do we invest our time and our money? And that's going to be an interesting debate, which I can't answer.
Right. We do have one more clip that I want to sneak in here. A neat discussion. Actually, Brianne Tideman wanted very much to join us tonight on tonight's show because she loves all of these discussions, but she could not make it. And so I did pull a clip with her and Kelvin Hepner having a discussion about seed destroyers. So either that are attached to the combine or carried behind. Producer Jay, if you could run that clip, and then our last thank you to our sponsors.
Yeah, so the integrated Harrington seed destructor, it uses the same type of mill as what was on the tow behind unit, but it's actually built into the combine. So there's 2 mills that sit right on the back of the combine that the chaff flows through. The seed terminator is competition to the integrated seed destructor. It's also built into the combine, but it's a slightly different type of mill using a multi-stage hammer mill instead. So new prototypes, new developments in the technology. The tow behind seed destructor was never intended as the final product because there was a realization that producers don't want to pull these kinds of machines. It's a lot more efficient for it to just be built in, and that's where we're moving to now.
Okay. You mentioned dust is something that you have to deal with as well when you're working with this, of course?
Yes, particularly if you're working with it inside a building of any kind. Outside, there's a lot more air movement. It's not so bad. It's not as loud. You're not working as close to it. When you're doing the stationary work, there's a lot of fine dust produced, and it's very, very itchy. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Something that we might not think of from a research perspective, but from a practical perspective if it gets used on a farm. Yeah. The key, I guess, is that you need weeds and the weed seeds to enter the combine, right? For this to be effective?
Yeah, absolutely. So in order for it to be effective, you actually have to have the weed seeds in the chaff. So they've got to still be on the plant when you go through at harvest time instead of on the ground, and they've got to be produced high enough in the canopy that you can get them in the combine. If you think about something like chickweed, which is really low growing, producers are tending not to cut that low. They don't cut at ground level because there's a big risk to damage to their equipment. And so we're cutting above that level. That means you can't get those seeds in the combine. Tumbleweeds can also present a problem. Depending on what stage they're at when you cut them, because of the shape they are, they can tumble up and over and off the header and also give you issues that way. So.
We also have this weed called wild oats.
We do have a weed called wild oats. And the problem with wild oats is, as many producers know, it starts dropping its seeds fairly early in the season. And that presents a problem for our ability to get it in the combine. We're doing some additional research on that, looking at earlier maturing crops, comparing swathing to straight cutting, things like that, trying to see if we can optimize the amount of wild oats we can get. But wild oats will be a challenge. Now, having said that, there's a lot of other weeds that are also challenging that will make very good fits, things like cleavers, where group 2 resistance is really starting to be an issue in the pulses. Cleavers look like they're going to be a good fit with the seed destructor. Volunteer canola. It's a big one. We grow a lot of canola. There's canola coming out the back of the combine. There's canola in other Roundup Ready crops like soybeans. And so managing the volunteer canola looks like it'll be a very good fit as well.
Our sponsors tonight are ADAMA Canada, The Sharp Edge, and Real Agriculture's Machinery Update. Real Agriculture is focused on getting you not only the news, but insight into what the news means to you and your business, and we deliver it directly to your inbox. Subscribe to the Machinery Update, sent weekly on Saturdays, for all our machinery and technology stories. Visit realagriculture.com/subscribe for more information. So, two things. We love butter tarts, and we have been told that there will be butter tarts at this OSCA summer tour August 18th. So I am there, Margaret. Actually, I'm not, but send me butter tarts. And apparently not a bouncy castle, which, Margaret, get on that. I agree with Warren. There should be one. But Jason Vogt says he hates canola. And that is a strong, strong word for canola out of a Manitoba boy. But Kim, I'll start with you. So seed destroyers are another one of these sort of tools. But as Brianne says, this is after the fact. These are weeds that have already taken yield, but do they still have a fit potentially in Western Canadian agriculture?
Yeah, they do. And there are some weeds that they will really do well on. In fact, volunteer canola, based on our last provincial survey, which took place last year, volunteer canola is now our number 3 weed in the province. It's our single most abundant crop. It takes up about a third of our acres, and it's our number 3 weed. And so to get those combines, running them at, optimum capacity and get the weed seeds where they're supposed to be going and get the grain where it's going, that's one part of the equation too. In order for the weed seed destructors to work, you have to make sure that your combine settings are, working as best they can, and to be checking everything with like a bushel or like a something that like a drop pan system to check your losses and that type of thing. There's a few brands on the market out there. So we do that. And then if you've got a seed destructor on the combine, there's 4 different brands that you can get. One of them, the Redicop, is made right here in Canada. We don't have that many of them in the prairies, but we do have some. But basically they fit on pretty much every make and model of the newer combines, at least anything within the last decade probably. And then there is another model that does well on older combines that maybe just don't have the capacity or the power to run some of the bigger ones. So I think it's something that it's basically a bolt-on. You can get it, you can put it on your combine. That's something that we can use. We know they do work well for certain weeds. There's a lot of testing going on down in the States with water hemp because that's one of their most problematic weeds, and finding that it does work really well for a weed like that. There is some seed loss right at the header where there's shatter and the weeds aren't getting into the combine at all. But the weeds that do go through the combine and that do come over the sieve and get into the destructor, for the most part, a very high percentage of them are destroyed. So unfortunately, it is weeds that are already there and are already setting seed, but we can stop that seed from hitting the ground and increasing the seed bank. That's one thing we can do.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead, Chuck, and then I've got some
I was going to say, the water hemp that I've seen around us, I don't know that you can even combine it. You have to get it into the combine first.
Right.
Yeah. It's very tall, right? Yeah.
It's just huge. Yeah. So but I think one of the comments I'm going to make on the seed destroyer is that it's a part of a system. Like you can't just say that there's going to be one new thing that's going to solve all my problems. And so, it's part of an agronomic system to manage the weed seed bank on your farm. And so if this works in your operation for then I don't see why anybody wouldn't try it.
Mm-hmm. Brianne makes the comment about kochia, about tumbleweeds popping over headers potentially. kochia is one of those incredibly difficult weeds to get a handle on. We do have resistance in kochia as well. So Kim, is that consistent with, I know that video is a few years old now, so is that consistent with the work that's happening, that it's one of the weeds that just doesn't necessarily go through?
Yeah, I guess it depends. Different places have bigger kochia, especially again, you go down into the States and their kochia seems to be a lot larger than ours in some places. And but that is a weed that can go up and over. It's a tough one, especially if you get into a big kochia patch. You do lose a lot of it. It doesn't get through the combine. Kochia is one thing that the seed is not really viable until kind of very late in the year too. So, but I haven't seen data. I know Brianne is actually going to be presenting some data at our Weed Science Society, or CWSS, Canadian Weed Science Society meetings in November. We're going to be talking about this subject, and she's going to be presenting some of her data there. So with Canadian data on Canadian weeds, so that'll be interesting to see some of that. But kochia is definitely something that we do want to limit the seed return. It actually has a very short seed bank life, so limiting that seed bank return can help with resistance if we can stop that resistant seed from going back in the ground, and then use up that seed bank. Really, a lot of the kochia seed is pretty much gone after 2 years. There is some that hangs around a bit longer, but that is something that if we could limit that seed return, we could maybe get a handle on some of this kochia. So it's just one way, but it's a way that might work.
Mm-hmm. Chuck, do you see, what do you think it could work well for in Ontario specifically?
I would think your pigweeds and your Canada fleabane and this kind of stuff. The challenge that we have is that some of those weeds get so big and thick that if they go to seed, like you can't hardly harvest those patches anyways. So that's, it's going to be a matter. It's another tool in the toolbox. And so let's say that you did have some escapes of, water hemp or whatever, and if it could eliminate 70% of that seed bank, like why would I not be interested in that? It's all about percentages, right? You can sit there and say you're going to have some header loss, and that's true, but what percentage, right? And how else are you going to get rid of it?
For sure.
Right.
Shout out to Janet, who says hello from Nanaimo. Thanks for joining us, Janet. I don't think Nanaimo is your usual home, so I hope that means you're joining us on holiday, which is my favorite thing, when people tune in, even when they're not in their regular digs. So thanks for that. Chuck, you mentioned something that you wanted to hit on tonight, and as our time here comes to a close, I think this is really important, is not overselling what robotics or technologies can do. So if a farmer is, excited about this, and I think there's lots to be excited about, how do we temper that with sort of the reality of what we can do right now or perhaps in the near future?
Well, I think we're very used to watching technology on movies and television, that these machines can do everything perfectly. And how many of you have taken a piece of technology out of the box and had it work perfectly as soon as you plugged it in? It's very, a lot of this tech is very problematic and troublesome. For example, the AI systems on the robotic weeders, every year the weeds can be different. If it's dry, if it's wet, if it's different, different conditions, different weed combinations. And it affects the algorithms. The robotic systems that exist today are maybe 80% reliable. You don't want to wake up in the morning and have your crop be gone. Stuff like that. We have issues with RTK GPS and connectivity, remote monitoring. There's all these things. So just we're not as far along on the robotic space as maybe some people would like to believe. We've really advanced in the last 3 or 4 years, but we're kind of, I liken it to like 1910 Detroit with the auto industry. That's about where we're at.
So you're saying there's going to be like some really amazing vehicles like 50 or 60 years later.
That's
Got
right.
it. Let's hope it goes a little faster than that.
There's what's interesting, if I digress a little bit, like there's a picture at the Henry Ford Museum of a bunch of farmers and extension agents looking at a steam tractor plowing, and some of them have smiles on their faces, some of them look frustrated, and some of them are shaking their heads saying that this will never replace the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where we're at with the robotic systems. We're kind of there, but stuff is advancing very, very quickly, and moving into, and it'll be moving into the field crops, because the North American market is very much geared towards large scale field crops, as opposed to the European market, which is geared towards horticulture.
Mm-hmm. So Kim, is coming from the weed science side of it, how important is it to you that these technologies get developed and keep moving forward and keep pushing the envelope?
Well, we know our herbicides are going to fail. Some of them are failing now. So we have to have other methods. We just absolutely have to have them. And they might not work perfectly great today, but they probably will at some point. Exactly how Chuck said, just not today. They're not perfect yet, but they're going to get there, and they're going to be scalable, hopefully, to our broad acre crops. And I hope they'll work in pothole country in southwest Manitoba, because that would be very challenging to run some robots through, I would think. But at the end of the day, we can all do things like diverse crop rotations, whatever you can make fit on the farm, and within every one of those crops, grow them as competitive as you can. And that's through, like, those are choices that anyone can make. You don't need to invest in new technology, and it's to use those tools so that we don't have as much of the weed problems to start with, so that we're not going in here trying to clean up all the time, and I think that's the thing. If we come at it from that end, and those are things we can do, everything from soil fertility to seeding rates and cultivar choice, whether it's a tall versus a short, or a bushy versus more of a stick type of a bean plant, that type of thing. Some of our crops are just naturally more competitive than others. And luckily for us in Manitoba, this is probably why we have less issues. We have in the past had very diverse crops to grow. And we have our cereals, and we have our canola. And when they're grown well, those are very competitive crops. And we're very lucky to have those. So we need to just keep playing on those strengths, and then embrace the new technology as it comes along, because we're going to need it, because our herbicides are not going to get us out of this mess. If our herbicides got us in this mess, you'd be insane to think a herbicide is going to get you out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Like then we're seeing, some of our IP soybean growers are seeing resistance, pigweed that's resistant to reflex, which is a common herbicide. And that's, it's got a lot of people kind of quaking in their boots saying, now what am I going to do?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, we hear that too. When we're going out and we're doing the schools, and we're talking to agronomists as well, and we're trying to tackle, what is the next most challenging thing, and some of them are the ones that we keep coming back to, and it's the here's what I was doing that was starting to maybe take hold, and now here it's got another layer of resistance that Kim, as you alluded to, sometimes we inherit, we don't necessarily cause. There's certainly ones that have been caused in different areas, but Janet notes, and I like this, I see biological control with AI being a new combo for the future. And that, I think, Chuck, certainly speaks to your point, and very much to yours, Kim, as well, in thinking about broader scale, the systems approach, multi-years, rotation, and all the other things that we can be doing that help keep our crops competitive and to outcompete some of these weeds. And a lot of them are very low tech, right?
And we're doing some experiments, not just us, but some other farmers, of growing like a reasonably competitive cover crop between some of these wider rows, so that they can maybe mow that cover crop down and let it compete against the weeds, rather than trying to use mechanical methods or other ways. So there's lots of novel ideas. And one of the things that robotics and AI does for us is it opens up some of these possibilities that we just didn't have the labor to do, or the precision to do in the past.
Well, and even like I look at right now with something like a cover, or using a particular plant to choke out others, when water is incredibly limiting, and that's the one thing we can't necessarily predict, is whether or not we're going to have a dry year. So certainly in dry, or areas that can tend to be dry, that can sometimes really actually be worse than if you hadn't done anything. But Jason says, that he doesn't think we've exhausted other cultural methods like row spacing and seeding rate. So have we done enough with, or have we exhausted? And Jason, I would probably agree with you that there's, and Kim, to your point, there's lots of work out there that does show, changing seeding date and row spacing and rates has this impact, but we don't always necessarily plan it for weed control. We plan it for we choose those things based on other reasons, setup, ease of moving from field to field, those sorts of things. Kim, is that a conversation that you have often? Is what else could we be doing?
It's usually my first conversation because I really think it's the first thing we need to do. And like I said, luckily in Manitoba and in Western Canada, we do have the luxury of having a more diverse crop rotation than some other places. But we can, within that rotation, it's so many things like, just tweaking so many different things with seeding rates and dates and even fertility. I see a lot more fertilizer getting broadcast because of, some additives, that enhance or that help us with, nitrogen losses and stuff. I mean, is that a good idea from weed control? I don't think so. But again, there's reasons, we're doing that for a different reason. And again, from a weed control standpoint, is that the smartest thing to do? So I think it's the problem is there's so many they're not little things, but they're all small things and they all add up at the end of the day to make a big difference. And we can make a big difference. There's work that has gone back years and years that shows about different rotations and within that rotation, different, tall versus short crops and densely seeded crops versus thin crops and that type of thing. And how it does make a difference, even if you keep your chemical control all the same, you still do a better job at weed control when you've got more diversity and you've got more competitive crops within that diverse rotation.
There's no silver bullet, Kim.
No. No, there's not. It's hard. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
It's a lot of things and then things change. I mean, we end up like last year with the very wet spring and we lost a quarter of our soybean acres last year in 2022. And so that, if you had a nice rotation planned, all of a sudden, we'd lost a quarter of our soybean acres just because we had a really late seeding year. And this, every year is different. So things do change and you have to adapt. But again, you're right. There is no silver bullet. And I think the easy days are gone. When you pulled into the field with a sprayer and whatever you had in the tank worked and you pulled out of the field and just went to the next one, those days are gone. I mean, they exist a little bit here and there and they do somewhat, still exist, but realistically those days are over.
And a little bit, that's how we got here. So I'll just throw that in there. It certainly contributed to some, not all, but some of our problems. Chuck, I'll end with the most exciting product or setup what are you most excited to have in the field this year or next year? What's the coolest robot / tech you're working with right now that you're super excited about?
I think one of the coolest robots that we're working with, besides the, obviously nothing beats a laser weeder for being cool. I'm not sure whether you have time to put up slide 15 on my Haggerty presentation.
We started a few minutes late. We can
That's
roll.
okay.
Yeah.
But I think the Farm Droid is still one of the coolest robots that we have. This robot, the reason what makes it cool is that one, it's solar powered. You don't need to charge it. You leave it in the field. And the other thing that makes it cool is it geolocates everything that it plants. So this, again, when you talk about a system, right, how you plant matters. So it geolocates everything, and then once it's done planting the field, it turns around and it weeds around all those plants that it just marked out. So it knows where everyone is. It's planted in a perfect grid pattern, and it has little knives that go between each plant and cultivates as close as you dare tell it to cultivate to. And it's still one of the coolest robots that we got. It works very, very well.
And if you had very tall chairs, it's a bar. Like you could sit at the table. Anyway, yeah, that is super cool though. It's like a multi-use though. Like it can plant and then weed. Okay.
Yep. On sandy soil in good conditions, this robot is good for about 45 acres for one robot, and then you can put more of them together.
Right.
Right. But Swarm. I mean, in clay soils and more moisture, it's good for a lot less than that. So it just depends. But this is the kind of stuff that's possible. And that's coming.
Very cool. All right. Very cool. Okay. Thank you. That we're out of time, but this is super cool stuff, and I can't wait to see more of it in the field. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Chuck, for joining me. This has been really fun. As Ray says, a practical and pragmatic approach to information sharing. Thanks, Ray, for always hopping on, and just some really cool discussions. And I really appreciate each of you joining me. Thank you, of course, to our show sponsors, to Real Ag Machinery Update, to the Sharp Edge, and of course to ADAMA Canada. We will be back next week, 8 p.m. Eastern, live, of course. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Kim. And everyone, have a great week. Cheers,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks very much.